Hey everybody, welcome to Quick Radio. Sorry we're running late today. We're getting started at 3 just because of Quan and I basically blasting right through this morning's podcast with a meeting, but it's free, so I guess you guys get what you pay for. Welcome to Quick Radio. It is February 9th. Today we're into our third episode of our Entrepreneur series, and we're going to be talking about the jump and getting into it. Without further ado, Quan, we alluded last week to how we got there in the conversation you and I had that led to us deciding to start a firm. What did that then lead to for you to get ready for it?
Yeah, I think going into that, it wasn't like an overnight decision. I think, you and I had been talking about different business ideas many years. And then when it dawned on us that we should start a professional accounting firm, there was still a lot of things that were kind of going through our minds and decisions that had to be made before anything actually happened. So I think, was it the summer of 2014 that we kind of had our minds set, but we were still in our jobs trying to think of how and when we were going to execute on the idea.
Yeah, we didn't have a business model planned out. At that point, we didn't have a name. We just knew let's do accounting. Fundamentally, I think at that point, it started to be a question of, the big one for me was okay, what do my finances look like? How long can I go before running out of money, to be candid. And so I started kind of going through my personal situation and my personal budget and thinking through, okay, my burn rate right now is X. My minimum that I could cut back to is this. And this is what I need on a monthly basis to kind of get by.
So for non-financial people, I mean, what's a burn rate? And
so burn rate is how fast I'm going through cash, and just in general, on what I spend normally. And then what I did was I kind of stripped out the stuff that I wouldn't be spending money on anymore, like a parking spot, and the things that I didn't need to be spending money on, splurging on video games or stuff that I didn't really need, that I could cut back on or cut out entirely. Now, I mean, it wasn't like, let's cut back to college days and eat Ichiban all the time, although I did do that for quite some time just because I like it. But it was a matter of, okay, if I was to keep spending and not change a single thing in my spending habits, how many months could I earn nothing? And how long was I willing to do that was the other side of the equation. Was I willing to go down to zero in my bank account or investments, or did I have a kind of floor, an artificial floor? And so I figured that out. Now that's a personal decision. And then I figured out, based on cutting back a bit, how long could I go? And once I'm going to skip ahead real quick and then I'll come back. But once we made the jump, I started tracking that on a monthly basis, like how close I was to that cash burn budget, and what my projected, when was I going to hit my floor if I, based on certain circumstances. So then as we started gaining clients and earning revenue, that timeline got further and further out, because that was going to be when I hit that floor was going to be my decision point. Is this working or not? And do I need to then go find a job, kind of thing? And I'm happy to say over 2 years in now, that floor date seems to keep going up further and further. For me, I've never actually hit the floor with regards to my limit, which was nice. So I never reached that go or no go point. I still evaluated things along the way like that, and we'll come to that, I suppose, later, but because I'm jumping kind of far ahead. But that's what I did from a cash standpoint, because that gave me the confidence to say, okay, worst case scenario, I'm going to last a year. I knew I had a year in me easy. I probably had 18 months without too much difficulty based on my math, right? And my wife worked and things like that as well. So that obviously played into it. But, realistically, I was trying to okay, can I stand on my own 2 feet here? And so that was important for me to do because, being an accountant and a numbers guy, I wanted that financial security, or that feeling of security. That sort of is like, I don't know if being an entrepreneur is like jumping out of an airplane. That was my parachute, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Well, I have a
I
question.
think, yeah, I think my story was slightly different, but I did go through that same process. I did crunch a lot of numbers, but at the end of the day, like if I were to tell everyone what my true story was and everything, like I think most people would not, like if they were in my situation, they probably wouldn't have had the guts to make that leap of faith. That's what it was for me, and I was, even my math was wrong being an accountant. There were just things that I couldn't account for that came up unexpectedly while we were going. And, I ran out of cash like 2 months before. I didn't have this artificial floor, this cushion that you did, Randy. I was basically like down to my last few $100s when we were heading into fall. And it was really bad because I was waking up at like 2-3 in the morning with nightmares. Like, am I going to be able to cover my mortgage payment this month? Like that's, I got to that point, and that was rock bottom for me. But, we kept going at it, and I guess luckily we made it through it.
Yeah. I had saved pretty aggressively and things like that. So I was lucky enough to go into it with the ability to kind of self-fund. I'm not gonna lie though, Quan, I went through that same kind of thought process. I don't remember waking up at night, but it was weighing heavily on me, especially that first year, really heavily in that kind of what did I get myself into space. And that was a lot of that, right? Like, the burn rate was faster than I thought. Mm-hmm. Like even as accountants, it's like you said, it's hard to take into consideration every single circumstance that could possibly happen. And then to throw a little fuel on the fire, I also got engaged and married. So that was a little bit extra that I guess I probably could have planned for, because obviously I knew I was going to propose, but it was funny. I just didn't, miss in my planning, I guess, right? But it's I think regardless, like for me, it was still stressful because you're used to working for 8 years and or longer. I had been working and had a relatively steady paycheck since I was 16 years old. So 13 years in the labor force and used to that continual payment
every 2 weeks,
right? And or twice a month, whatever, and it ends up that alone I think weighs on you more heavily almost than the cash, because like I knew I wasn't going to go bankrupt. My wife worked, right, and we weren't going to go bankrupt or anything like that, but it's kind of, I put a lot of pressure on myself to, like I said, stand on my own 2 feet, so that it's real is what I'm trying to get at it. Kevin, what was your experience when you
it brings up an interesting question, because I'm along the lines of you, Randy, where I was fortunate to have saved up a decent amount of money. I had a similar 12 to 18 month runway that I was totally fine to kind of go down if it was turned out to not start making money as quickly as I hoped, which has turned out to be the case for me. Mm-hmm. But an interesting thing reflecting on it, for me, I almost feel like having that cushion was a curse in a way, in that I didn't feel the financial pressure as much, because I missed the paychecks for sure, but I was able to, make withdrawals from my savings account, knowing that I still had some cushion. And it wasn't until more recently, in the last few months, where that cushion starts to run out, that I've started honestly to feel it more, and has led to me pushing and hustling more. So for me, I think having that cushion was actually a bit of a curse.
It was a weight.
Yeah, it was. Well, I don't know if I want to say weight, but it
held you. It was a speed break on you, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, it was, I wouldn't say it was that. I would say what it was in the earlier days, I was a little less maybe tight and stringent, a little less careful. And then as that number started to drop and the cushion started to get smaller, that's when I put in the concept of the artificial cushion, because I decided that I was only willing to go so far. And then I kind of, as you get closer to that kind of like drop dead day, I didn't want to have to make that call. So I started being smarter about what I did.
Yeah.
Like smarter about my personal financial decisions so that I could keep at it. Cause I didn't want to have to kind of say, I didn't want to have to like, my worst fear was like, what if I put a full year into this and spend a bunch of money trying to do this, and then my investment doesn't kind of pay off? You know what I mean? I was like, and what if it's that I run out before I can give it a proper go? Because I knew it was going to take a couple of years to kind of get this thing to the point of, the first couple of years are the hardest, is what they say. Yep. And I knew I had to get that far. I needed to get to 24 months, I felt, to give it a proper shake. And so that's when I started kind of like being a little more strict, I guess. If that makes sense, personally, and that helped. But it also raised the pressure at the same time. But I think it did the same thing. I'm not going to say I wasn't motivated in the earlier days, but because I was, because I don't think it was a break on me, but it certainly was. I think it made me smart about making sure that we did things that are going to add value to the firm and ultimately be able to pay ourselves.
Well, and I think another thing, moving slightly away off the financial topic, but you guys, like you said, you weren't initially sure exactly what it was going to look like, but you knew it was going to be accounting, right? That was kind of
that was going to be a core competency for sure.
Exactly.
And we started off with kind of a different business model, though. The idea was to provide back office services and eventually like a full service slate of it. And what we found was it just wasn't something people wanted. It didn't resonate with people. What did resonate and what started getting us a ton of traction was accounting and tax. Mm-hmm. And like, surprise, surprise, people want to go to a bunch of CAs for accounting and tax work, right? But
even that was hard, because then we were in the position where we had to kind of differentiate ourselves from every other accountant or tax person, and like there wasn't really anything that made us stood out, I'd say, like at the get-go.
And it was guys like Brad Silmanus, and I'm going to name drop a bit, and Sean Freeman, who's turned us on to the software and kind of started connecting us with the people who would ultimately help us down the path of cloud accounting. And so I guess the point in this is, we started off with one business model, and fundamentally it flopped. Like, I don't think there's any two bones about it. It basically was a complete failure. Right? That's fair to say.
Yeah, we had to make a pivot pretty quick.
Pretty fast. And, one person's advice to us was, if I come to you, I'm coming to you because you're an accountant and I want accounting services. I don't want to hear about all the other million things you want to do. I want to hear what you can do for me from an accounting standpoint. And that really resonated with me, and that really helped me. That was like the kind of the fog cleared, and I was like, okay, we need to have a focus on a core competency, like really focus in on that. And once would you agree, Colin? Once we did that, that's when we really started getting some traction.
Yeah, absolutely. Within the matter of weeks, our leads started to, we started to generate higher quality leads. And then the guys we touched base with, like just following up on, we were able to clarify a bit what we were doing, and that helped our conversion. Our conversion rate was really, really high in our first year.
It's still
I think
pretty high,
after that point. Yeah. I think a lot of it is because a lot of our leads are referrals based.
Yep, for sure.
Within our network. So
having that focus definitely was important for you guys and your success. And
the pivot, I think, is the key point.
Yeah.
On that is, we tried our thing for a couple of months, but it was, we didn't beat a dead horse on it. We realized and tested it and got external advice. And my advice to somebody starting is, we should have done a better job testing the market with our business model beforehand. Because, we did do some market research, and it was met with like, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. But it was really kind of that casual. We should have recognized it more as a casual, like, yeah, that's a good concept. Not as opposed to like people saying, yes, I would pay you for that service.
That's definitely true. Although there is sometimes an element to just doing it, seeing how it
Totally.
works, but then being able to pivot quickly like you guys did, because
Yeah,
if you'd stuck at it like, no, this is going to work,
we would
the
have
outcome's
probably
going to be
run out of
different,
money,
right?
right?
Mhm.
Like, we needed to make. You got to make money to be profitable. You got to get clients. You got to be able to generate revenue,
And
and
now,
that pivot was a key part of our journey.
while being able to pivot is important, I definitely agree. I can say from my own experience, there's also a risk of pivoting too much. I've started 4 businesses now in a year and a half, and they've not really been, they've kind of been somewhat related, but I've pivoted because, they maybe haven't been working as well as I thought. But at the same time, I think maybe, at least with one of them for sure, if I'd given it a little more time, it probably could have taken off more. So
Mhm.
there is
Are
a
you willing
matter
to
of
say which one?
the data solutions consulting
Okay.
business. But ultimately, with that one, although I can do the work and I don't mind doing the work, it just wasn't giving me the satisfaction that I was looking for,
Right.
which is why I pivoted, even though it was starting to have some success. And my friends actually give me a lot of a hard time about that. They're like, every time you start to have some success, you pivot.
Well, I mean, there's an element of, in the early days, you do kind of have to grit your teeth, I think, a little bit. And, if we're in this to want to be entrepreneurs and run businesses, but you also have to deliver a product. And in the early days, if you're bootstrapping it, there's no one to deliver the product except you for the most part.
Yep.
Like, you gotta sometimes do work that's maybe not your bread and butter.
Yep.
So, but it's a personal call at the same time, right? Like, if it really doesn't give you satisfaction, then
Yeah, I think for me, if I was in that situation, maybe the passion wasn't there, I probably would do the same thing and pivot pretty fast. Because for me, I wouldn't see a point in continuing down a path and potentially wasting, a couple of years of time.
And it's
But
interesting.
like you said, it's a preference thing, right?
Yeah. And now that I'm kind of coming full circle, honestly, because even a few years before I made the leap, I was thinking about the area of personal finance and helping people with money. But then I ultimately didn't go down that path because I got a promotion and made some decisions to keep doing what I was doing. But now I'm coming back to that as that kind of area for me where there is some demand. I do enjoy doing it, and I've now stuck with it as my kind of prime focus for 6 months, I think. So, and it's starting to show some promise. So
that's good.
yeah. So it's
And
definitely balance.
That's a tough balance. Yeah, exactly. Like, you got to have this good gut sense of when to make the pivot versus when to bear down and kind of double down on it. And
who to listen to, right? Because there's gurus out there who'll tell you to pivot quickly. There's gurus out there who'll tell you to give it 3 years or whatever and then pivot. I mean, ultimately, you kind of have to listen to your own intuition, I think.
yeah, but I think if you're going to give it 3 years, you got to see some results, right?
Yeah.
Like, you got to be able to see some level of growth. And it's not to say that you don't still change things. I think you still have to do mini pivots or small adaptations.
Any business has to change and adapt, right?
Well, because like I said, we started off, once we focused on accounting, we still had more of a traditional model, and then we started moving further and further into the cloud accounting. Got connected with some really smart people from other parts of the world who helped us figure things out that way a lot and kind of quote unquote see the light of where the future of accounting was going. And then we realized that was a great opportunity, and it meshed with our values like tremendously. And so then that was our second kind of mini pivot, was to say, okay, this is now what our differentiating factor is. This is what makes us different. And we've gone then we doubled down and we nosedived and we went hard at it, and that's paid dividends for sure.
Mm-hmm. So that differentiating bit is probably something worth talking a little bit more when you're trying to figure out if you should make the leap, right?
Well, I mean, sometimes, yeah.
But I feel like most businesses don't really know what that thing is until they've gone out and failed once or twice, or have gotten that feedback. It's very, I think it's very rare for even if you're looking at, like, let's say the app industry. The apps that are out there that are doing really well, those are completely different than what they first or initially had come up with. Trying to think of some examples, but yeah,
like,
most of them are.
In our case, it was always in the back of my mind, like, why are we different? Why would I always ask myself the question, why would someone hire us as opposed to someone else? And until I had a good answer, I knew I didn't have a differentiating factor. And it doesn't have to be like groundbreaking or revolutionary necessarily. You know, if you were creating a product, your differentiating factor could be coming to market with it cheaper than anybody else, like cheap and high volume. That's a differentiating factor. Why would someone buy your product? Well, your product is 10 cents per unit cheaper than the next guy's product, and it's substantially the same. That is a differentiating factor. It's an old school, simple one, a commoditized differentiating factor, but it is, right?
Yep.
It doesn't, you don't have to be the next Instagram to necessarily be profitable. You just have to know who are you inside.
Yeah,
right?
that value proposition has to be there.
It has to be something.
Has to be something, yeah.
So, you know, I think it took a while for us to land there. And let's go back to the early days. Like, we started with a business plan and forecasting and all that kind of stuff. And that's so hard. Like, forecasting is tough.
It's impossible. It's almost, I don't know, like for me, I kind of thought that being a business person, I thought that whole process of coming up with a formal business plan was sort of a waste of time.
Yeah, how thorough was your business plan? Just out of curiosity.
It's like 6 or 8 pages, right?
Okay.
Yeah, there was quite a bit of meat in there.
But it was all.
It's not something that we executed on, I would say.
No, it was out the window by 6 months.
2 months. Yeah, I'd say even 2 months in. Like,
Yeah,
I don't
maybe
even think we looked at it.
Well, I know, like, we took our first forecast and I basically cut it in half that first year, and we didn't even come remotely close to that. But like for the rest of the business plan, yeah, like, well, I mean, once we pivoted to focus on the accounting, the business plan was out the window because the business plan was for the original idea. And now what we've done is we do a 1-page business plan.
Yeah,
It's a little more concise.
This is my current business plan. 1 page.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that's good.
The process, I think, because I think when people, and this is even me on the first business I started, I just didn't really do much of a plan because it was stressful and I got frustrated with doing it. But the process of answering some of these questions, I think, is important because it gets you to think about things.
Well, it gets you thinking about things like, why would someone buy my stuff?
Yeah, exactly. Those important
Some of those key questions. And that's why I think the 1-page business plans are great. Like, what's my vision?
Yeah.
What are my goals? Like,
what are a few key metrics?
What are a few key metrics? You know, do I have an idea of what my target market is?
Yeah.
Even
what
remotely?
Are the costs?
Yeah, and that's an interesting one because so our first year, the first 2 years, we had our forecast in our first year, but like I said, it really didn't pan out. Year 2, we pretty much ran on a cash budget, right, Quan?
Mm-hmm.
To be frank.
Mm-hmm.
Year 3, we've got a formal budget. And I think that's something that I'm happy that we're at from a stage. But we needed, we needed a couple years of history to actually have something that was even useful. Because like I said, we did that budget forecast as our first year's budget, and it just wasn't that useful because our business model changed so many times. Mm-hmm. In that first year, and our cost model changed a bunch, and then it got better. Now, having said that, when we were pricing and when we were changing, you and I did some really detailed numbers calcs to support our pricing and things like that, right?
Yeah, to make us feel comfortable with what we were charging at the time.
Yeah.
You know, but looking in hindsight, I think there's still a lot of opportunities there. But I want to say that something else
every time, right?
Something else that was really helpful for us because we were in an industry that's quite saturated. We had a lot of benchmarks to go off of. So guys who have been at this for a few years, we knew what their numbers were roughly, like sales at least. So that kind of gave us something to go off of. Yeah,
it gave us some growth targets.
Mm-hmm.
And things like that, those were really, really useful in year 2, I thought.
Yeah.
Because those we were meeting or exceeding those targets. And then I was like, okay, yeah, we're on the right track because we're following that same kind of roadmap. And the other one was there's good data out of the US in terms of like profitability for our industry. And that was always our kind of like, you know, last stone, for lack of a better word, is, okay, what's our bottom line compared to those numbers out of the US? And so while we didn't have like detailed down to the penny and we we were tracking our P&L against our income statement against budget every single month, we did have those high level measures that we were like, we kept close tabs on that stuff, on those key metrics.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I would say, like, you know, I highly recommend budgets, especially as you get larger, but and you got to at least have some key numbers in your head and be looking at that and seeing real time, where are you in that?
I would say, like, talk to people, people in your industry, people who are, you know, business savvy, pick their brains. There's so much useful information out there.
Yeah. And then distill it to what you can focus on too,
Mm-hmm.
because you're super busy. Those first couple of years, you're crazy busy as an entrepreneur, and you need to be able to, like, have those numbers in a dashboard, or even just pull a report up, look at it and be like, yep, on track, move on. Because there's not necessarily always time to be delving down into it, and you may not have the money to hire a firm like ours to deal with it.
Yeah, I think for us too, we were very comfortable with talking about some of our weaknesses.
Yeah.
And, like, even just sharing how we do our things, like how we do our stuff. We were pretty open with our business, and as a result, we got a lot of good feedback.
Yeah.
Because you're being authentic.
Yeah.
Well, and if you're willing to talk to people about the challenges you face, they'll be willing to talk to you about the challenges they faced and how they overcame them, which is a good way of learning. Which is what we're trying to do here, is to be open about these things, because it isn't, you know, the whole key to step back a little bit. This isn't necessarily easy, and it's in fact, it's not easy at all, and it isn't something that, you know, you're not going to work hard at. It isn't something that you're going to necessarily have overnight success. That doesn't tend to happen very often, if at all. Like, the success comes from hard work and learning from failure, and you have to be willing to embrace that, I think.
There's a bit of luck involved too, and timing.
Yeah, for sure, luck and timing and blah blah blah. But you can't control for those things.
If you can't, but if you don't, put in your effort for the things that you can control, then I guess you shouldn't.
To an extent, you make your luck.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I mean, you hear about the success stories, but unless it's a real in-depth feature of that success story, you rarely hear about all the failures and struggles they went through, probably over the years it took them to get to that success. It's pretty rare, the overnight success in the entrepreneur world.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's good to talk about the challenges you face from that perspective.
So going back, like, we were talking sort of our fear, excuse me, when we kind of made the jump, and some of our fears that we had to overcome, challenges. Are we done with that, or do you want to
fears and challenges?
Go into that a little bit more. I mean, I can talk about my situation in that when I had made the decision to jump ship, to quit my job, I mean, there were still 8 months before before I put in my 2 weeks notice. And it was interesting for me because, like you said, we were kind of coming out of university. We had the stable paycheck since we were 16, whatever. And for me, I was, spending a lot, and, I was living in a downtown condo, driving a nice car, going out for drinks like 4 days a week. Over summer, there were months where I was spending like $500-600 just on booze. And when I decided to do this thing, I basically had to cut back on everything. And the plan, it was a good plan, but it was very hard to execute. And I remember we had just gotten married, Angel and I, and right away we ended up downsizing, moving out of our condo so that we didn't have to cover a huge mortgage, rented a 2-bedroom condo just outside of downtown. My brother lived with us in our other bedroom to help cover some of the rent. We stopped eating out, got rid of the expensive car. Like, these were huge sacrifices that, I'm thankful today that my wife was able to support me through, because she didn't want to do it, but she knew it was for, there was potential there, and it was going to pay off at the end.
Yeah, I think for me, I didn't really make the decision to jump until like the end of 2014, basically when I left my previous job. And it was, you know, so it was those first few months of 2015 is when I went through that kind of thing. Because before that, we were very open on our timelines. Like it was kind of more like, yeah, we're going to do this someday. And then once that came around, I was like, nope, it's now. I'm going. Because I remember talking to you, and basically I called you and I was like, yep, I resigned, kind of thing. I'm going for it. And I remember you were, we knew you were going to get through like that busy season.
Yeah, we had actually downsized our place already at that point, and I sold off my car because for me, what I had to do was I had to build up some savings. And given the timeline, I was only able to put together maybe 8 or 9 months worth of savings in that short period of time. So
yeah, and for me, I was like, for me, it was like, okay, now I got to figure, I got to figure things out pretty quick because I made the decision really fast to be like, yep, it's time. But then, so the first, made that jump first few months, it was really like kind of figuring things out and going through the process, getting it all started up in early 2015. And we started finally in like end of March, once you were able to join us.
Yeah, for me, I didn't want to burn any bridges at all. So I stuck it out through the busy season, and it was a good call.
Yeah, I made my call. Call, and then I spent the first few months just kind of trying to set stuff up in the background, and not necessarily operating, but working on like websites and working on applications and things of that nature. Like nothing exciting. So those first few months were refreshing a little bit after working in a job for a long time. But then, but it was sometimes hard to like put in full days because there wasn't anything really happening yet. Does that make sense? Sorry, I'm kind of going down a meandering timeline here, but
our industry is pretty regulated, and until you have the paperwork approved and whatnot, you can't really go out there and put yourself out there as a firm or sell certain services. So
like we weren't able to do anything until we got our license, and that was until the end of March. And there was I do a bunch of learning and things like that, a bunch of training type stuff to get myself to a position where I was ready to apply. And that took a few months. So
I mean, we did do our due diligence, but unfortunately the process didn't turn out the way that we had expected based on the work that we did. There was just a lot more to it than we had expected, and so the timeline kind of got drawn out, probably a few months longer than we thought. Hey,
yeah, it did. It did for sure. That's something I don't really know if you could avoid it, because like I felt like I said, it was hard sometimes because there wasn't a lot to do, but at the same time I couldn't have done it like on weekends or evenings.
You'll learn from experience too as you go, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we talked to another guy and he's like, yeah, we were able to get up and running in 4 to 6 weeks, but then I didn't realize that what happened was he bought a book of business. And so I guess that process does take that long, but if you're starting from the ground up, I'd say 2 to 3 months.
Yeah, because we had to get insurance. We had to get like all those types of things to get started, right? And that took time because we had to get the forecast. We had to do a business plan. We had to get everything, business cards. Like
easier than building a pipeline, though.
Yeah, that stuff. Yeah, for sure. Kevin, why don't you tell us a little bit about like what were the early days like for you?
Well, I mean, I kind of I started, I guess, 2015 with knowing that at some point in the year, I was pretty sure I was going to make the leap. Because I'd already been thinking about it for a couple of years off and on by that point. And then by the time July rolled around, I made the decision, gave my notice, and I actually ended up working for another 2 months. Similar to Quan, I didn't want to burn any bridges, so I, stayed on board until my replacement was identified and helped train and all that. And I'm glad I did, because I've maintained some good relationships since then. With the expenses side, I mentioned I had a good cushion saved. I've also religiously tracked my expenses since 2009. So I had a very good idea of what my costs were going to be. And I managed to stick within exactly what kind of my personal costs were going to be. The business costs, those were a little bit more of a surprise. But in terms of getting going, it was a pretty big change for me, going from, just like you, working steady paycheck since I was like 16. And that was kind of the first time I hadn't had a job in whatever 13, 14 years. So it was a big adaptation and a big learning curve to kind of start to build those self-discipline habits and start putting yourself out there. And honestly, it took me a while to start putting myself out there, building up that confidence to do that. I'd never really done any selling before, so it was a scary prospect. And yeah, it definitely took a few months till I got my first coaching client. I guess it was about 3 months from when I made the leap. So yeah, it definitely takes time.
How much cash do you guys think like you should be putting aside if you're to do this all over again? Maybe this is more for our listeners.
Yeah.
Like, they're ready to make the leap. They don't know how much money they should put aside. How many months of expenses do you think you should be covering?
No, you're talking about living expenses aside from the business startup expenses, because that could vary a lot depending on what they're doing.
Yeah. I think everyone should go in with some startup capital, and it's going to be different for every business. But personally, in your bank account, how much should you have to cover how maybe not the dollar amount, but how many months should you give yourself?
I'd say 12 to 18 months. And then still, if you really want to be maybe not having total stress, have some sort of emergency fund that you're not going to touch. That's kind of like, your last ditch bucket. But if you get to that deadline where that 12 to 18 months runs out, you definitely time to reevaluate. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I would try my best to not have to I'd try to keep a nest egg if I could, even at the end of it, like that artificial floor we talked about, just because then, it could take you some time to find a job again if you did decide to pull the plug. So you would want a little bit of extra living costs, or alternatively, if you have that 12 to 18, just have good timeline set as to when you're going to reevaluate how things are going and if you need to make a change. But yeah, I would say minimum 12. I'd go at least 18, if not 2 years, if you could.
So don't do what I did.
Yeah, but again, you were. It's not like you were out in the cold, right? Like,
no, that's true.
You went effectively from dual income to one income.
Yeah, I still had my wife to lean on if
it got bad enough, right? Like you always were trying to stand on your own 2 feet, which is fair.
Yeah,
what I'm trying to do too.
And that's why I had those nightmares.
I hear you, because
back in October of 2015.
October of 15. Yeah, October of 15. That's when it finally started to turn around, hey? Because that was the first month where we took a bit of money out.
Mm-hmm.
And to be clear, that first year we didn't make any money. The company still owed us money, as I think we've mentioned before. Mm-hmm. But we started to at least repay some of that expense that we'd put in, some of those operating expenses we'd funded.
Mm-hmm. And another thing I would say is, if you started out and like me, it hasn't really ramped up as much as you initially thought, and you're starting to get towards the end of that time frame, like I'm, a couple months away at this point. It's okay to maybe pick up some part-time work on the side, to help extend that runway, which is exactly what I'm doing right now. you don't have to just like go, then stop. You can kind of blend the two if you need to.
Yeah, especially if you find an opportunity that meshes with what you're trying to do.
Exactly.
Like, if we're going to be like candid here, which I think we should, you're working with us now.
Yeah.
Part time. And, you know, the idea is obviously we're supportive of your goals. And so we're trying to we need help. Like we needed a hand, and you wanted to come do some stuff, and it was a good fit because you've got some part-time work and you still have the opportunity to do your side hustle, which is a concept we'll talk about another day. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a really good fit that way because everybody wins fundamentally.
Everybody wins. I agree, and I appreciate it.
You know, we should have we should have our friend Sean come on one of our shows because his approach was slightly different. I believe he was running a side hustle at the time.
His side hustle turned into his full hustle, right?
Yeah, so I think that
cool way of doing things.
Yeah.
I still maintain I don't think you and I could have done it, Quan.
The side hustle, there's no freaking way. Well, no way. I was limited for sure.
Yeah, for you would have been allowed to. And there's no way I could have feasibly done it.
I also didn't have enough hours in a day to do anything else.
Yeah, that was my biggest limitation. And then also like I would it seemed like how much work it was to get it off the ground. Like it was, I mean, a really light week for us is 40 hours is like a joy. That's like a vacation week is 40 hours of work. Right. So,
yeah, and like I tried doing the side hustle thing, and I don't know, I just wasn't, I had too many hobbies. I wasn't able to make the sacrifices and I admire people that can do it because I just, maybe I could, if I tried again, maybe I could have, but at the time I just wasn't willing to make the sacrifices I would have needed to make the side hustle go.
Yeah. But that's increasingly what people are doing.
Yeah. And
in our generation,
having gone through it, I probably would have tried a little harder.
At the side hustle to try to get some revenue. Yeah. I mean, there's something definitely, there's an element of safety there, right? If you can do it and you can build up a bit of a revenue base so that when you do go full time, you're not out in the cold. Like when the three of us did it, we jumped. Like that's why we call it the jump. We opened the door of that plane and we jumped. And your chute has to open.
But at the same time, and this is one of the reasons I think it didn't work for me, because I was still having that steady paycheck, I didn't feel the urgency as much also.
Yeah, that's fair.
It's a fine line. I think it really depends on the person.
It probably is a type, right? Like the urgency helps, right? Like there's no question. Like once the bank account starts to drain for real, then it's like, okay, we got to figure something out here pretty fast because that's for somebody who's worked for as long as you or I did, that's a new experience.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not all about money, right? Like it's about the overall goal and things like that. But the reality is in the early years, a lot of it's about money.
Yep.
Like
but you do have to look, it's a mindset though too. Like you got to look at it as investing in yourself and your future because you're making some sacrifices in the short term, you're cutting back. But if you really believe you have a good idea and a good offering to bring, you should have the confidence that in the medium to longer term, it's going to far outweigh where you would have been if you just stuck at what you're doing.
Yeah, it's the investment, right? You're investing in
you're investing.
future.
It's not
you're
a cost,
investing in
it's
your
an
own business,
investment.
And that's how you have to think about it.
Yeah.
Which is an important concept. Then when you're evaluating your business later, is what's your return on that investment? Because there's getting paid, and there's getting return on your investment, and those are different concepts. I think. Should be treated as different concepts.
Well, just like, when you're looking at your numbers, if your revenues are bigger than your expenses, that's great. But are your expenses including your own time, right?
Yes, which is something I think we'll get to in a later day. I want to wrap this up with one kind of final paramount question that I think everyone would be wondering. What's the best time to make that jump?
Well, I mean, I'll start off by saying I don't think there's ever a perfect time. Like
it's
most
like
things
taking vacation, right? When you're in a corporate job.
I haven't heard that analogy, but okay.
there probably are better times, like times where you have some savings built up that you can lean on, right? I mean, I was incredibly fortunate the time I did it. I rent the place I live in, so I don't have a mortgage, I don't have any debt, I don't have any kids, any dependents, any of that stuff. I don't think you can get to a much better time than that. But that being said, I still don't think there's a perfect time. And I'm really grateful.
I agree. I don't think there was a good time for me. Like financially, the timing was terrible, but I trusted my gut, and at the end of the day, that's what I went with.
Yeah. For me, the life timing, like I said, I got married. My first year, I quit my job. Within 12 months, I quit my job, started a business. Quit my job, started a business, got engaged, got married, and we were having a kid, literally within a 12-month span. So yeah, I mean, that was a wild year, without a doubt. But I mean, that goes to the point. There's never a good time. But now I look back and I'm like, this is an awesome time to be doing this because my little guy's really young, and I'm hoping that, you know, by the time he's a little older, that we're up and running fully and we're staffed up and things are kind of cruising along and all those types of things. And kind of the really, not that you're ever not hustling at this, but you know, we've got a team built and all these things are in place. So that, you know, when he's little, it's all good. That's what I'm hoping. The other thing I wanted to talk about, Kwantu, is you and I received a lot of criticism. Mm-hmm. Like overt and subtle criticism about our decision to start right when oil prices were having an epic collapse in an oil city, where obviously the economy is heavily based around oil and gas. And within months of us leaving our jobs, you know, you were seeing 10% plus unemployment in the city, right? And massive layoffs all over the place.
I think people are wondering if we got laid off, to be honest.
I think a lot of people were. And I candidly, out of maybe it's sensitivity that I probably shouldn't have, but I always make the point of saying, you know, we made the decision to leave and start this business. It wasn't a result of necessity. But and not to say that that's wrong or there's anything wrong with that. And in fact, I think that's one of the most positive things that can come out of tough times and layoffs is good people who have motivation going out there and finally taking the opportunity, because it's been forced upon them, but they take that opportunity to start a business. And I have tons of respect for that.
And a lot of them actually do make it through and build these great companies.
I think it's a great idea. Like, I think it's a good opportunity. At the same time, you know, that wasn't the case. And I wanted to be clear that wasn't what we did. We made the decision and we made the decision on a downslope. And we got a lot of people who use the phrase about how much guts it takes. And there was an element of respect there for sure. And I'm not going to begrudge that, but I always kind of felt there was an undertone of like, that's kind of stupid. The market's
an idiot. Yeah.
And then a couple times, overtly, that was said. In one time in particular, that was said to me overtly, and about what a terrible idea it was. So, you know, from an economic timing standpoint, Kwan, we picked what a lot of people thought was the worst possible time. How do you see that over 2 years in today? How do you see that decision?
Well, like I told you, I've always been...
Well, I know you told me, but you didn't tell the listeners.
I've always been the guy to kind of go against the grain. So when I heard that, it was reassuring to me that it was a good time to leave. And I'll tell you why it's a good time, just outside of, you know, my fundamental beliefs, but
no, just outside of being a contrarian. You know,
yeah.
I view you as a safe person and I don't want to be safe. So if you tell me it's a bad idea, then I know I'm on the right track.
Yeah.
I'm kind of with you. I'm a contrarian a little bit that way too.
But the downturn, it created opportunity for us, right? Like, it gave us the time, because when you're in a growing economy and like a hot cycle, things are moving really, really fast. So yeah, maybe you can get a client, but you can lose them just as quick, or you can. Maybe it doesn't give you enough time to build up your processes, because there's a lot of work that goes into starting a business. You can't get things going up and running as fast as you think. You need that time. And so
or you could get bogged down to a point. Sorry, I'm going to jump in here, where you've got enough work where you're working full time.
Mm-hmm.
And then are you really running a business, or are you just functionally an employee for 50 companies?
Yeah, you're just benefiting from whatever residual is out there as a result of the booming economy, right?
Yeah.
We really had to evaluate things. Every decision was a critical decision for us, because, well,
I mean, they're always critical decisions.
It is, but it's easier to make some of those calls when everything is rosy, right?
Yep. And I think the other thing that it tells me is we started this and have so far succeeded through one of the worst economic situations in our local market in a generation. And that gives me a lot of confidence
that
in
we
our business model,
that we could sustain the next downturn if it were to, when it comes.
Not just that, but also that, how well we've done so far through it. I think that was really positive. But the biggest thing I see are twofold. Like you said, we've got time to work on our processes so that we can grow at a really effective pace with systems and automations and processes to be as efficient as possible as we grow. So it's not this painful teenager puberty growing experience that hurts. We can grow sustainably. And then secondly, for all those waiting until things were good, we got 2 years on them when things were bad. 2 years in the market, 2 years building our brand, 2 years building our reputation, 2 years building a client base.
2 years of practice selling in a shitty time.
Exactly.
When people don't want to spend money, right?
Exactly. So, as things start to turn and pick up, I have confidence that we'll be a market leader that way, because we've been out there doing it, slogging it through the mud of 2 years of bad economy. That, to me, I think is a huge advantage of our timing. Like, think about it like a stock market. What do we basically do? We put our money in the market in our business at a low point.
Mm-hmm.
And when do you want to invest in the stock market? You want to invest in when the market's at its bottom.
Yeah,
that's kind of how I view what we've done.
The challenge for us is when things turn around and we're kind of in the heat of things, how do we protect that position?
How do we stay ahead of the curve?
Yeah, because we don't want to be hit hard on the next downturn, and that's really going to be. We don't have experience going through that. Like we had experience starting up through that, but we don't like going into a downturn. I'm not. Once you're established, I think is a different. Yeah, different beast.
I think we need to always be protecting against that as much as we are able to, and then have a game plan for when those things inevitably happen.
Yeah, I don't know what the answer. Honestly, I don't know what the answer is.
That's maybe something we'll take offline, because I don't want to give away too much secret sauce here. But
I haven't even thought about it, to be honest. So
I got some ideas, but we'll take that one offline. Guys, I got a heart out here at 4. So thanks for your. This was a great episode. Getting some great feedback online here. Thanks as always, gents, for the show. Next week we should be back at the usual time. Appreciate those who jumped on here at 3 on an unusual time to join us, and those who are listening later on. You can find us on iTunes. You can find us at quirkradio.ca on the webs, and you can find us on YouTube at Quirk Radio. Thanks, everybody, and see you next week.